Good morning, I'm Adam Sexton. New Hampshire's state legislature prides itself on citizen involvement and making sure every voice and every bill is heard. It's also one of the largest elected bodies in the world. But in this pandemic, that size and openness have tragically become liabilities, and the House and Senate have had to get creative in their plans to reconvene next month. The Senate will use the House chamber for its socially distanced session, and the House will be meeting in the 7,500-seat Whittemore Center on the UNH campus in Durham. Here to discuss their plans this morning are House Speaker Steve Shurtleff and Senate President Donna Soucy. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Adam.
And Madam Senate President, let's start with you. What kind of safety precautions will be in place given the risk, obviously, of transmission of COVID-19?
Well, certainly we've consulted with public health to ensure that every safety precaution that we can think of is employed on the day that we do meet in session. That would include initial screenings entering the building, asking people to wear masks, and safely socially distancing. And given that we are a 24-member body, with the permission of the Speaker, utilization of the House chamber will allow us to safely distance.
And Speaker Shurtleff, you face a bit of a heavier lift, obviously, with the 400-member House there. You're going to be in the Whittemore Center. It's huge, but it doesn't seem like a stretch to imagine that there are going to be some members of the House who take exception to having to have their temperature taken or be screened or answering any questions. So what's going to happen if a state rep does not want to answer those questions or have their temperature taken or wear a mask?
A state rep has a right to attend the session. We would hope that all members of the House would comply with the request to wear appropriate attire, especially the face mask. There will be a separate area at the Whittemore Center for those individuals that do not want to wear a mask, who won't wear a mask, and they'll be separated from the rest of the body. We're going to have surgical masks available for the members, as well as shields for those members that can't wear a mask because of asthma or COPD. We've consulted with Dr. Talbot, Dr. Ballot, and other healthcare professionals to do everything humanly possible to keep the members of the New Hampshire House safe. That is our primary responsibility. But unfortunately, there will be probably a handful that will not go along with that, those guidelines, and we'll have alternative seating for them.
There were about 2.5 months left in the process when the clock stopped essentially back in March. You have some bills that never even got a public hearing, and in the House and in the Senate, it's unique to New Hampshire. Everyone gets a voice, every bill gets a vote in committee, and every bill gets a vote on the floor of the House and the Senate. So obviously that's totally out of reach at this point. How do you decide what moves forward and what doesn't? And we'll start with you, Madam Senate President.
Well, what we've had to do is look through the bills that we've had and asked our committee chairs to work with the minority counterparts and also with their counterparts in the other chamber and sort of prioritize what some of the issues are. Obviously, what's most important to the people of New Hampshire right now is how we manage through COVID. And there are some important issues such as telehealth, telemedicine, where there's certainly bipartisan support. There were pieces of legislation in both chambers, and we're going to work together as much as possible to manage through some of the important issues relative to COVID that will continue to assist those in New Hampshire manage through this difficult time.
And Mr. Speaker, will it be exclusively COVID-19 related, or are we going to see other things here and there pop in?
We'll see other bills as well. We've had our committee chairs work with their ranking members to vet bills that are most important that we need to get done this session. Ironically, the fate of the House bills are now in the hands of the Senate, and the Senate's bills are now in the hands of the House. We want to do what we can to get as many bills passed, but those bills that can wait till the September filing period to be brought back in the new session, we would urge, the prime sponsors to do that, and so that we can end the session as soon as we can, but in a safe manner and in an effective manner to get as much of the legislation passed as we can do so.
And you're both suing Governor Sununu essentially right now for accruing what you believe is too much power in this pandemic response process. But it's a pretty significant use of power as well for leadership to decide, okay, these bills move forward and these bills die. Probably unprecedented in the history of the Senate, Madam President.
Well, it's not the speaker and I that are making those decisions. As I said, there's a process going on where members are consulting with other members, are working through to reach consensus on many of these issues. I would note that we intend to publish a calendar with public hearings. There will be public hearings on bills that are House bills that hadn't been heard. We will also have amendments that, yes, consolidate other bills. I mean, we're not simply setting aside or killing bills. That's not the case at all. We are trying to efficiently manage the number of bills we have and work through the issues to reach as much consensus as we can and to consolidate the work that we're doing.
Mr. Speaker, you have had some success already with remote meetings. I think certain committees meeting over Zoom. Will we see that sort of surged in the next couple of weeks, a lot more activity there to try and get to the level of transparency, or close to at least the level of transparency that we normally see?
We're extremely proud of the work that our House staff and our joint staff have done to make these remote hearings so successful. I think we've had a dozen committee meetings so far. We've exec'd over 30 bills that hopefully will be coming up on the floor on June 11th. Without the help of our staff, this wouldn't have been possible. And without the cooperation of both Democrats and Republicans on the committee, this wouldn't have happened. Adam, I just have to go back and correct one thing you said. You mentioned that the lawsuit that was filed by myself and the Senate President, as well as the chair and the vice chair of the Fiscal Committee, was to curb the power of the governor. And I just want to explain that we realize that under this pandemic, the governor has the right and the responsibility to take on emergency powers. We understand that and we concur. What the nature of the lawsuit was about was not to tell the governor how to spend the CARES money, the $1.25 billion. It was just to add to the transparency and the accountability that it would go before the Fiscal Committee so people would have a chance to vet those expenditures to see where that money was actually going and to keep a record.
You both do serve in the process of this lawsuit on the Governor's Office for Economic Relief and Recovery Legislative Advisory Board. Starting with you, Senator Soucy, describe for us, even though this isn't the situation that you would want with things, in your opinion, having to go through the Fiscal Committee, is this at least an acceptable level of participation? Do you feel as though your voice is being heard in this process through the Gopher?
Well, the Gopher Committee has bipartisan membership and membership from both chambers. It was selected by the governor. It's not a typical legislative process. It's a process that we have engaged in. We did actually come up with a series of recommendations that were unanimous, and we listened to more than 21 hours of testimony and from stakeholders across the state, and we'll continue to work to make those important recommendations and do what we believe is in the best interests of the people of New Hampshire. We want to collaborate with the governor, but we also recognize that we were elected by the people in our districts to serve, and we have a constitutional duty to do so, and we will continue to exert our duties and our efforts to make sure that we're managing through this crisis.
Back to this upcoming session, Mr. Speaker. Describe for us, what will the rules on the floor be? Will there be any limits on debate or limits on amendments? Because essentially, the idea being the longer that you're there, the greater the potential for the virus to spread if it is among any of the members.
Absolutely, and that's a great concern to me as it is to others. You know, the average age of the New Hampshire House is 63. So that means half our members are in that vulnerable category with the pandemic, would have more of an impact on them than it would be those that are younger. As far as a limit on debate, we'll have to see how it goes during the day. If we need to have a time limit, then that's something we bring before the House to vote on. Amendments, as always, must be brought into the House 24 hours in advance. That rule is still in effect and will be adhered to. We're hoping to have a session that probably won't last more than 4 or 5 hours. One additional thing I would like to see brought in is an opportunity to introduce a constitutional amendment. As you opened up this segment with Adam, we have a 400-person New Hampshire House, but our state constitution says we must meet in person. There is one exception if we are engaged in an enemy attack during time of war. I would like to see that broadened to include any time of a national or state emergency, like we're facing now, that the New Hampshire House can meet remotely. And that's one additional thing I hope we'll be taking up.
Yeah, that constitutional amendment would certainly be a high bar to pass pre-pandemic, but now it seems like it's something that absolutely needs to happen. Madam Senate President, what about bills that are out there that we essentially have a pretty good idea would be vetoed? There are a lot of bills that were there from the previous session that you guys wanted to bring back. You're a co-equal branch of government. These are a lot of values that you hold that you want to bring forward, but the extra hour or 40 minutes that it would take on that debate, is that worth it if you know that that bill is going to be vetoed by the governor?
Well, I don't know. I mean, certainly there were some bills the governor vetoed, a number of them last year. I don't know that the governor will view every issue through the same lens. I mean, we certainly don't. I think each and every one of us, when we filed legislation, had certain priorities and certain points of view. And I think for everyone in this state, everyone in this country right now, we're viewing things through a different lens. And, I don't want to second guess what the governor will or won't do. As I said, we're trying to work in a bipartisan and orderly fashion to ensure that we have consensus on many of the bills, but there will be some differences of opinion, and I'm sure there may be some bills that the governor chooses to veto, but that's his prerogative, and that is part of the process.
Mr. Speaker, obviously precautions are going to be taken in relation to the virus, but we saw just a few weeks ago in Michigan armed protesters in their state legislature. Obviously UNH has rules about firearms on campus, but it's possible those would be ignored by people. What's the plan if we see a Michigan-style sort of armed protest at the Whittemore Center?
We've already talked to UNH Police Chief Dean, as well as the state police, as well as our House security, Sergeant of Arms, and others involved, the Durham Police. If there is a demonstration, we know that they're very capable of handling it. Again, our utmost concern is the safety and the well-being of the members of the House. A lot of times people come to these demonstrations, they don't wear masks, they aren't taking appropriate action to not infect somebody with the pandemic if they are a carrier. So we want to make sure that the members of the House are safe and their well-being is taken into consideration. But I think the law enforcement community is more than capable of handling anything that may happen.
And how about on your side, Madam Senate President? Do the rules of the Senate apply when you move into the House chamber, or how's this going to work if we see an armed protest?
The rules that we have in place as a state Senate would still apply as we move over to the other chamber. We are still in the same building, so the rules that apply for entering the State House, other than screening, obviously, for COVID-19, would still be in place, and we would still have our normal process. As I agree with the Speaker, though, I think we would try to not limit debate, but try to work through issues and try to make sure that we are there for the least amount of time possible, accomplishing the most amount of work.
Okay, Madam Senate President, Mr. Speaker, we thank you for your time, and we'll see you on June 11th.
Thank you, Adam.
Thank you.